Hello and welcome to the Beyond Bookstore podcast, formerly known as Story Brand. And Lisa and I are here with Sara Berliner, we were just discussing how hard it is to describe all her activities and history, but Lisa will take an attempt at that, introducing her in a minute. Um, and it'll be a couple days before the video and transcript of this terrific session gets out because we're traveling, but it will be out certainly by the weekend. Lisa, do you want to introduce Sara?
Yeah, and we have a little bit of audio problem with Brad and R&B, so can't hear. So maybe you can look at the chat while I
Yeah.
introduce Sarah and see. Not sure we're able to hear the three of us. Welcome to Beyond Bookstores, and this is really a session that meets that title well. I met Sarah just 3 weeks ago, maybe. I guess 3 or 4
Yeah,
weeks
not
ago.
long ago.
Yeah, in Coral Gables, Miami, at Books and Books, thanks to the wonderful Mitchell Kaplan, who we all know and love, and he brought you over to tell about the collaborative work that's going on that you're leading with the Books and Books Literary Foundation, and I just was amazed. I mean, every word you said, I wanted to hear more because it was a powerful example to me of 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 expanding the work and of meeting literacy needs and book deserts and all of the good stuff. So I just was left wanting much more time with you, and I thought that it would be a good idea to share that and do because we're talking today about the work of a foundation that runs alongside a bookshop and that really is mission driven and really meets the needs of the population or the area you're serving. So Sarah has an amazing resume and a lot of really great, we could spend an hour talking about it, but let's just dive in to, you can read that on what Steve put and look, but let's talk. Welcome, Sarah. I'm so glad that you decided to join us today. So,
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. Quite an
well, let's
illustrious list that I get to join. So
It
thank
is
you.
an illustrious, and we try to go with some different angles. The Beyond Bookstores is really saying moving beyond our ideas, and so we've had people on the call that are just iconic in their leadership. Mitchell Kaplan is one of those, and you came to work. Let's get into this by telling us, how'd you meet Mitchell Kaplan? How did you come to work together and at Books and Books?
Well, I am lucky, indebted to the author Judy Bloom, who has been a friend of mine for several years and who introduced me to Mitch a few years ago. And just as, you two should know each other. And then when I was trying to figure out what did I want to do next, and I wanted it to be something more local because I was living here but doing a lot of remote work, and wanted to dive back more deeply into the culture world. Uh, Judy was like, "You got to go talk to him." So he said, "Well, yes, sure, I can introduce you to local organizations, but actually, I need help. I started this foundation. I want to grow it. Here's what we're doing." And I said, "When do I start?"
So, and how
That
long
was
ago?
it.
That was 2023. That was
No, actually,
that's
that was, I started in March of 25. So it's just
25.
been
Okay,
just
my
over
mistake.
a year. He
So,
started the
yeah.
foundation formally in 2022, started operations in late 23.
Okay.
So it had been going for, not even a year and a half when I
Yeah.
joined.
Well, with your background and with when you joined, what was your intent? What was your hope? In investing your life in this way, with books and
My
books and
hope really was
foundation.
to take my learnings from having worked in startups on the for-profit and nonprofit sides
Mhm.
and kind of bring those, both it to bear on really fulfilling Mitchell's vision. I knew of him before I knew him. I knew his reputation. I knew what he had done for Miami and for literary culture
Yeah.
nationally. And I just thought, really, whatever it is that he wants to do is going to be worthwhile. Um, he's one of the people really like Judy, where his reputation preceded him. And I hoped that he would be the person that I would wish he would be by that reputation. And he absolutely is,
Well,
just as Judy is. So it's really like for me, just this incredible threading together of different things that I've done and sort of a unique perspective that I think I'm able to bring to it.
You want
well,
to,
yeah.
Lisa, do you want to talk for a minute, Sarah, and try and encompass what you've done? I find it mind-boggling.
Sure thing. It is nonlinear for sure. But I'll start out by saying that before I had any professional aims or obligations, I grew up with an uncle who had an independent bookstore in New Haven, Connecticut, the Foundry Bookstore. I don't know if anybody ever knew Henry Berliner or knew the Foundry, but
Yeah.
it was a real staple of that part of Connecticut. And my happiest hours of my childhood were spent in that store. And he was a kind of a grumpy, kind of a very classic, like crotchety, behind the counter, building community by accident, not because he was like a warm and fuzzy guy. But he really did, and it was just beautiful. Like I would have the run of the place, and people would come in and talk about what they were reading and what was next. And he always had a curation program. Like every month, a book would show up in the mail for my dad because Henry always knew exactly what he would want to read next. So I grew up in a family that saw this. It was like default, like I knew that it was special, but I didn't really know how special. And wherever I've lived, I've always found my bookstore home, but I really never knew just how meaningful it would be for me to actually be part of a bookstore this many decades later, because he closed that store in 2003. So yeah, it had been probably 20 years before I really felt that sense of connection. But in the interim, my undergraduate degree was in folklore and mythology and visual studies because I was very interested in storytelling and in like learning about cultures throughout the world. And it was actually a great way to kind of pull in the anthropologist in my brain, the sociologist in my brain, the artist in my brain. I was a puppeteer and puppet theater director and did a lot of stuff with what is now referred to as children's IP, but at the time was just like kids media. And after college, wrote and edited children's books with the idea that we would turn them into, again, what are now called franchises. We didn't have that language back then, but always starting it in books because we felt that that forced a discipline in storytelling that we wouldn't necessarily achieve if we started those stories and talking about that world and those characters in other formats. And we were, pretty successful. Had a series called Edgar and Ellen that started out with Tricycle Press and was then bought by Simon and Schuster. I think we ended up doing 12 books and we were in 17 languages, and I got to understand how international rights work and all that kind of stuff. And we had a show on the Nicktoons network with Nickelodeon and games with Mattel and Lionsgate DVDs. This was in the era of DVDs, and we built a big web community. And Stephen, you and I had a conversation about transmedia and what that looked like, 20 years ago. So that was a
Okay.
lot of fun. And I then kind of took that learning into really being sort of squarely in the digital first space for a while. And always with this idea of, okay, if it's developed digitally first, what is it going to be in books? So doing books with Candlewick based on properties that I was helping develop for other people. I made the first Harry Potter app. I made some of the first Disney apps. This was in 2008, 9, 2010, when apps were a new thing. when iPhones and iPads were new. Um, and since then, I've really been involved in all sorts of different startups, primarily in digital startups, but always kind of like double or triple bottom line types of businesses. And then the nonprofit that I started in 2018 was something called Vote Like a Mother. And it was an attempt to help people understand that, first of all, there's your literal vote, but there's also voting with your time, your wallet, your speech, um, and that parenthood and caring for others, even not literal parenthood, but just caretaking, could be a lens for your politics. And I just felt like there was so much me, uh, going on in the US, and I really wanted to bring it back to us.
Yeah.
Uh, and so I donated that to Chamber of Mothers, a larger nonprofit, in 2022, and they run it as a campaign within their organization. And yeah, that's sort of what led me
So,
here.
so how do you, how do you think that cornucopia of skills applies to a foundation connected to a collection, shall we call it, of bookstores? Because Mitch has more than one bookstore. But so how does that translate, all that experience?
That's a great question. I think that because it's a bookstore, an independent bookstore, the resources are not unlimited, and you have to know how to do a lot with fewer resources. And when you come from startups, that is just an extremely familiar position to be in. You're always wearing many hats. You're always trying to figure out what problem you have to solve, much less what the solution is.
Yeah.
And so building something that didn't exist before, no matter what the goal is, just generally that framework was something that was very familiar to me, and something that I felt like if I could do that and be extremely passionate about the potential impact and about the cause of it and who we were going to serve, that just so beautifully brought my sort of passion driven um, career, my interest in making change together with my skills, which are, talking to people, deep listening, um, you know, uh, acting with empathy, and sort of synthesizing information and being able to quickly arrive at a path forward.
Yeah, and you talked about, just to get specific about your tactics, which I think are fascinating, that your fundraising tactics. Well, first of all, that Books and Books is not a huge organization with millions of dollars and is paying you a CEO fee. That in fact you're on. You might talk a little about how you work limited hours
Sure.
and using that to appeal to donors, which I thought was fascinating.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I hoped, from the beginning that the fact that I am used to operating at a high level with limited resources would be something that I could pitch as part of why we were worthy of support. Would it make sense to share a little bit first about what we do and
Yeah.
then to talk about how we do it? So, Mitchell founded the Books and Books Literary Foundation, and very specifically has literary in the title, to be part of his work creating literary culture and getting books into people's hands generally. His vision for where those activities would take place and why they would be philanthropic versus the work, strictly the work of the bookstore, which he's been building since 1982, always with an intent that he's fulfilled of creating community in Miami around books and authors. Um, the idea is to sustain the work that's already been built through Books and Books and the three core stores in the Miami area and the over 400 events that happen every year. So it's to sustain that work and to make sure that um, that can continue to flourish, because it's actually, I sometimes say to him, Books and Books is as much an event company as it is a book retailer. And as a physical space, it is a book retailer. There is no devoted event space, but events every night of the week, plus take over, one or more rooms of this book retailing space. But the idea to support that so that it's not entirely reliant on book revenue at the events, but also then to go beyond the walls of the bookstore and expand the mission to be able to reach communities that have not, in the 44 years of Books and Books, been able to typically access the bookstores by being there to buy the books or being there to attend events. And so it's really taking what he calls the special sauce of Books and Books in Miami, which is books and authors, and going into Title I schools, going into shelters, going into public libraries, all sorts of different community spaces where we can really nurture readers. And that's both new readers, young readers, all the way through older readers. It's to nurture writers as well. He's been extremely passionate as a supporter of authors, since days before he even started Books and Books. And whether that's young readers, young writers, and new to the industry, or people who've been doing it for many decades, that's like a really the biggest part of this outreach. The nurture readers and writers is sort of the first pillar of the three pillars of the foundation. The second is to cultivate community, and so that's within the stores. Of course, that's about doing things that bring people together within the theme of literary culture and all the different forms that can take. And then the third pillar is advocacy for freedom of expression. So Mitchell started something called the Freedom Coalition, FREADOM Coalition. And that brings together grassroots groups from all over Florida to convene, share best practices within the realm of freedom of expression, advocacy for the right to read, and working against book banning. Florida, you may know, leads the nation in book bans. And it is something that he's been working on for many years. And in the last several years, as the book banning has ramped up, he has responded in kind and brought together a lot of groups that are working on this and giving them tools to enhance their work and to grow. So that's everything from events where people can come together and table and garner new supporters, to space to meet, to just the work of connecting. He's just a really, really strong connector within his network. And so that work that we do, we have the benefit of being able to access resources that are already a part of the bookstore. So people who work full time for the stores are as part of their work helping with foundation efforts. And then I'm the only one who doesn't have a formal role in the stores. And we started out with, I was at 5 hours a week, I think. Yeah, 5 hours a week when I started. We were successful with some fundraising. I went up to 10 hours a week. And then actually, the beginning of April, by bringing some of our supporters to our school visits, was able to really, without asking for it, have donations earmarked to increase our capacity, and specifically for me to grow my role. So I'm now at halftime. And it is very, if I were literally doing everything all myself, we wouldn't be able to do as much as we're doing. But because I can work with resources that already exist, who have, until a few years ago, just been working on things for the bookstore, but who I've been able to create like a culture of philanthropy and help them understand that this helps Books and Books proper grow. And if they're passion driven people as well, so they understand. But it is to a degree a little bit of asking people who are already overworked to do even more. Um, the idea also is that um, the work of the foundation can actually help the bookstore grow, and that long term, the support for the store's activities actually means, that jobs are preserved, that doors stay open, that perhaps benefits can grow because there is this other source of support. We're not entirely reliant on book revenue.
Let's talk a little bit about some of those stories from the three pillars that you've mentioned. The nurturing readers, and like give us a story of what that looked like. I know what I walked into Books and Books, and it was just a random, what was it, a Tuesday night, Wednesday night, something, and here's the mayor of Dade County getting up doing poetry with an improvisational, stand-up bass and drums and trumpet, and followed by the poet laureates all, doing their poetry in the courtyard, and then stayed for an author event that immediately followed, and immediately followed that a trivia night. And all of that feels very much community centric and community building, and it feels like it's tied to this work. But you've got your own stories that are outside of that physical space too. So talk to us about the nurturing of readers and what that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what you've described is absolutely part of, the intention is for the foundation to be able to support those kinds of happenings. They're things that have always been part of the Books and Books experience. And part of that is the physical space of Books and Books as a third place. It's the flagship store is in a courtyard building. It is beautiful, landmarked. It's sort of a U shape with bookstore rooms and a cafe, indoor part of the cafe. And then there's cafe tables throughout this courtyard. And it's very flexibly structured so that different things can happen in different corners. And you can set up a stage area, and you can, on Independent Bookstore Day, we had a vintage market and a tattoo collaborative tattooing people live in the courtyard. So that is absolutely something I don't want to discount, in that it's not necessarily replicable for all bookstores. But some of what we do happens within book spaces. And what I've seen is that we've been able to be more open to events where we don't necessarily think they're going to be like a break even on the revenue side or even profitable. But if the foundation is able to support an event like that, we're able to take a chance in a way that there might have been more debate about previously. It's not that Books and Books wouldn't have done those events, because of course they always have, and that's just Mitchell and the cultural tone that he sets. Is we do take chances, but it's easier to say yes when you know that you have this sort of backstop to be able to, replace book sales if you take over a room. And on the outside, the bookstore side of things, we have a program called Meet an Author, Build a Library, where we go into Title I schools and we bring an author. They have pre-signed books, and every student that attends that author visit gets a signed copy of that author's book. And what we've heard from even some of the most best-selling current children's authors, I mean, James Ponti told me a story. I do a little testimonial video with every author, and we've had about, I think we've done about 75 of these visits to Title I schools since I started. And James told me about how coming to do school visits where every child gets to take home a copy of the book is so unusual. And he was a kid growing up in North Florida who couldn't afford to get anything at the Scholastic Book Fair. And that was just really hard, and you can see how the Scholastic Book Fair, is supposed to be this time of joy and excitement, and it's like a mini Christmas or whatever at school. And for some kids, it's very much not that. It might be painful. But if you come to a Books and Books Literary Foundation school visit, you and every other kid who's in that room gets the same treatment. You all get to meet the author. You all get a chance to ask some questions after the presentation, and you all get to take that book home and start or build your home library. And we know that the data, there's a huge correlation between the number of books in the home and educational success, civic participation, achievement, all sorts of different metrics. So that's really, really important to us. And it seems to be very meaningful to the authors, which was actually not something I really anticipated going in. And James isn't the only author who has said this, that this is not typical. So that's probably our most robust program that we have. It's been operating the longest, and we work directly with the Miami-Dade Public Schools to host it and to set up those visits. And it's work on their end. It's a lot of work on our end. But every time I attend one, I'm like, yep, this is why we keep doing that work, because the kids just absolutely, they walk in, especially the middle schoolers, as you can imagine. They walk in. Last week we did an event for 80 sixth graders, and actually more typical for us is 150 to 300 at a time. So it was a smaller group, but it gave me more time to really sort of study them on their way in. And I have a seventh grader, so I'm quite familiar with what middle schoolers are like. And they were just very sort of standard, like playing it cool, not really interested, kind of like looking at their feet, figuring out what everybody else was doing in the room. And they sat down and they're kind of like, okay, what kind of boring thing is about to happen now? And then Pablo Cartaya took the stage. And he is a local award-winning, best-selling middle grade author who also comes from a performing background. And he captivated them, just had them locked in and telling stories about growing up Cuban American in Miami. There were a lot of kids. They were Cuban American. There were a lot of kids who, if they weren't Cuban American, could certainly relate to that experience, who have abuelas, like he was talking about, who are fierce and will, protect you and sometimes also punish you. And it just so resonated with them right off the bat that they were locked in for that hour, and they had so many great questions, and they didn't know that they were all getting a signed copy of the book. So the amount of cheering, it was like Pablo was like a rock star. That was just, incredibly meaningful. And for him, for the kids, for the school. And so they said, well, next time, can we have our entire middle school? And it's, yeah, absolutely. We'll bring in another great middle grade author. Something we do that is adjacent to that program, it's called the Great Big Free Book Fairs. And we do those typically in partnership with other nonprofits. And actually, that's maybe worth highlighting, is that most of what we do, we are doing with a partner. Mitchell really felt like we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We don't need to figure out how to get into different neighborhoods and populations ourselves, because we can work with partners that are already situated in those contexts. So they can help us ensure that our programming is culturally appropriate, can help us on the logistics of what are the days and times that work for this population. Is this a situation where an after school thing is possible for a Great Big Free Book Fair, or does it need to be on a Saturday because that's when people come to the library, for example. So we work with the Friends of Libraries, we work directly with libraries, we work with organizations like the Chapman Partnership that work with unhoused individuals and families. And the Great Big Free Book Fairs it's kind of like like a Scholastic Book Fair, only all the books are free, and there are author readings. There's a signing table. You come in, and typically it's kids and families come in, and the kids each get to select 2 books from an assortment co-curated by typically a librarian in that neighborhood who knows what those kids would want in consultation with our children's book buyer. And so they put together what that assortment is. We lay it out beautifully on tables, and the kids really can't believe it. And honestly, the parents can't believe it. I had a mom say to me on Saturday, we were in Homestead, which is an incredibly diverse and culturally rich area that's like the southernmost area of Miami-Dade County. Lots of there's remote info workers, but there's also farm workers and everything in between. I had a mom say to me, we came to the library for just a regular, like, we're returning our books and getting the next set that we have to return. I can't believe we get to go home with books we don't have to bring back. And that is, just an amazing thing to be able to go and do for people. We had Sara Berliner, who wrote a book called Our Roof is Blue, which is about a family in a hurricane in Puerto Rico, and their roof blows off and they have to cover it with a tarp. So their roof is blue, and what that's like and for those kids, and the aftermath, and getting a new roof, and they ultimately end up painting it blue. So a beautiful book, and it was just incredibly meaningful for these kids. We had 2 groups. It was the most diverse groups that we've ever served. Every type of person that I could possibly imagine in the Miami area was represented there. And they all just like enjoyed their fellowship. They were talking to each other, having fun, doing arts and crafts, interacting with the author, and enjoying getting to pick out books, and also to get a signed copy of the author's book as well. So every child went home with 3 books. And even within siblings, every child was getting their own. There was not, we didn't say like per family, because we really feel like that's important, right? Is that kind of stake in, this is for me, and I can do with this what I want. So those are like some of our biggest programs that reach kids. And some of our programs that reach adults include things like reading parties, which was started by my colleague, Alyssa Exposito. Primarily, they are silent reading parties with the idea that we get off of our devices and we all sit together and read. And we know that this exists in other places, but there wasn't much of this happening in Miami. And there just has turned out to be such a hunger for that kind of community building where we can all come together in companionable silence, as she says, and just simply read and have it structured with, we're going to read for 30 minutes and then we're going to take a break and have some wine and some light fare and discuss. And she's got prompts ready to go with questions so that people have a way to engage with strangers. And that's a really important part of that cultivate community pillar, which is not just cultivating community among people who have been longtime Books and Books customers and coming to events for many years and live near one of the stores, but drawing people together for new experiences and having them talk to strangers. Because, as you probably know, there's not a lot of that happening, and, getting outside your echo chamber. So that's things like that are the kinds of things that we're doing in that realm. And always looking for new venues, new partners to come to us with ideas, ways that we can slot into existing efforts without needing to necessarily create something new. So, can we come and be the books and authors layer in something that's already going on? So, people have started to call on us for that. There was a superintendent's 5K that was part of the public schools, and the Miami-Dade Public Schools Foundation came to us and said, "We're going to do this race village at the end of the race, and it's an opportunity to have, I don't know, maybe it was thousands of families who are participating in this race specifically for the public school students and parents and caregivers to come through and experience your programming." So we added a tent to their village, and we had a Haitian American author, Tico Armand, come and do readings and sign and also just chit chat, because kids don't, if they've never met an author, they do not have context that authors are real humans. And they see a name on a cover and it doesn't really mean anything to them. And so you bring them into a place where they're not expecting anything and they get very curious. And, we created a space with beanbag chairs, and they were able to sit and read the book that they were given and be able to take it home. So anyway, that's a lot, but those are the kinds of things we're doing.
It's incredible. I mean, just an incredible array of things. And Brad had asked, are these all new books that people are getting, that the kids are getting? Are they?
That's a
They're all-
great question. So we do primarily give new books because a lot of our books are given like it's a bulk order of one book. So we go into a school with an author, it has to be copies of the same title. So there's, as far as I know, not a mechanism for doing like a big used by all at once of a single title. But another program that we have that's likewise run by my colleague Alyssa is stocking little free libraries. And in fact, that's something that a donor has sort of established a format with us that we're hoping to be able to replicate. And Lisa, I know this is something you and Mitchell have talked about, where this donor came to us and said, "There's a particular little free library that I would like to see kept fully stocked all the time. And so if I make a donation to the foundation, could the foundation purchase and curate books to go into this particular little free library?" And we said, "Let's try it out." And she made a donation at the beginning of the year for that year. It worked really well. And she did it again this year. And so that's now a program that we'd like people to be able to sponsor a specific little free library. And beyond that, because of course we are a foundation that we're able to dream up things like this, we'd like to create a program where actually we can have someone sponsor the building of a new little free library, particularly in book deserts, and that we would be able to facilitate it, from beginning to end.
Yeah. A quick clarification from Sarah was asking, the Books and Books have their own events, and they have lots and lots and lots of events, 400 events. And then
Yeah.
there are some events that you collaborate on, or that there's some crossover. Can you clarify that a little bit more about,
Yes,
you're
absolutely.
doing a
And
lot of
actually, I
events
realized,
away from, yeah, yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I realized that I didn't really finish my thought on with the little free libraries. So the ones that are supported by a donor, those are new books because we're sort of, curating based on sometimes their interests or, using their budget to purchase new. But we fill a lot of other little free libraries and actually other libraries generally, like at a hospital and a children's wing, where those will be used books. And people do donate lots of used books to us. And often they're in like beautiful condition, and we're able to go and populate different spaces. And actually, for the first time at the Great Big Free Book Fair that we did this past Saturday, we had a cart of used books that was from the Friends of the Miami-Dade Public Library. They were our partner on the event. They just have a bunch of donated books, and they said, well, how about, we'll as before, let people take a specified amount of the new books, but the used books, we're happy to just let people have at them. And so that was unlimited. And so the parents that were really motivated to build up their home library, they went and they were going through this huge cart and finding things that they thought would resonate with their kids. So in terms of events, the foundation is not involved in the vast majority of Books and Books events currently. The hope is that we grow and eventually that we become a source of support just generally for the events program, but our budget doesn't allow for that yet. And so we pick and choose, and I would say there's probably 2 to 4 per month in-store events that are under the foundation banner. And that's really, for the most part, Mitchell's judgment call, on which ones make sense to do in partnership with the foundation.
Can I ask a question, Sarah?
Yeah.
So when you do that, you take an author event and you put it under the banner of the foundation. What difference does that make in terms of either support, cost, or promotion? How's it done? I mean, what's that any different than just putting a banner up?
Right. Well, sometimes it is. Sometimes it is putting a banner up, just because we, what you might call brand marketing, because it's an event where there are going to be a lot of people, where there is some pro-social aspect to the programming, and where it makes sense to make that audience aware of simply that the foundation exists. Because, I mean, most people who should know about Books and Books, who live here, know about Books and Books. But I would say the percentage of those people who know about the foundation is smaller than I would like it to be. So we will use that as a form of brand marketing just to spread awareness at some events where the financial support of the foundation is not essential. Sometimes it is about doing an event, making it possible to do it because you're not sure how many books you're going to sell at that event. And sometimes you're pleasantly surprised, and sometimes it's, of course, less than you think. So the financial support of the foundation means you can defray lost revenue by taking over a room in the bookstore and hosting your event, which, beginning to end could sometimes be 3 hours of lost sales in that room, between, starting your setup of chairs, and people get the idea that maybe they shouldn't be browsing in that room. And so they move on. And then, of course, there's, the event itself. And then afterward, if there's a signing, you've really taken over space, that, it's helpful for the foundation to be able to support that. But then there's also the costs of doing events, right? There's the staff time, there's, equipment costs. There's, you could consider it a room rental, right? At some point that maybe there would be a fee associated with that. There's, pre-purchasing copies. If it's a foundation event, sometimes we will give away copies, send the word out to fellow nonprofits and have them share it to their staff and their communities to say, first come, first serve. The Books and Books Literary Foundation is giving out, X number of free copies of the book at this event. And that's a way to get people there. So those are kind of the ways that the foundation, can throw its weight behind, making events make sense financially. But I think, over time, the goal is for the foundation to kind of be just like this ongoing source of support where we don't really have to pick and choose, that it is certainly going to be promotionally attached still with certain events, because not all events are really appropriate to affiliate with a literary foundation. But that maybe in the background, the foundation, is working to be a source of support just overall.
Yeah, one of the examples that we've talked about on this podcast and you and I discussed was Kepler's, where Praveen Madan is the CEO. And their foundation, they're probably one of the others besides maybe Baldwin and Company and you that have a foundation. And they use that actually to offset costs of any event. So the nonprofit has a small staff in their case. It's only one store, which is interesting. They have a small staff that works doing social media and promotion and stuff for all the events. And that way they're able to fund those people through donations and grants and the stuff you're doing. So, and you're at halftime. It sounds like, your goal leading the witness here is to be full-time and to do more of what Kepler's does, which is that no longer do we count on events selling books, which I think is one of the mistakes that bookstores make. I think author events are about promotion and reaching out to the community, not about selling books.
Yeah, I mean, I think Mitchell would probably say it's a combination of those. That of course, you do still want to sell books because part of our reason for existing is to get books into people's hands, and events are a great way to do that, and to get people really interested in a specific book. But yes, I mean, I think the goal ultimately would be to grow to a point where the foundation can just kind of be this ongoing source of support for the events program and the community building work that happens at the store, and could defray salaries, could contribute to equipment costs, could, for example, like replace the broken microphone, could contribute to, renting a room in the bookstore for an event. And whether that, is continued to be viewed on an event to event basis, or whether that just becomes like we contribute X amount of philanthropic, dollars to the event program, and then the events team determines, where that goes, does it defray some of the social media team's salary, right? Like, you mentioned with Kepler's, does it, pay for an additional bookseller to be on site during events so that there's not as much scrambling between the register and the room where the event is being held, and sort of dials down the amount of work that people do, because it's really a lot to be running an event and running a live sales, situation at the same time. I don't know. I don't know what form that ultimately will take. I think that remains to be seen. But for now, our goal is to help the Miami community understand that the third place that they've come to know and love, needs that we need them to kind of stand up and say, like, if you love this, I'm not just going to go buy my books there. Because as Mitchell says, my longtime customers have always thought that they were supporting a nonprofit by shopping at an independent bookstore.
Yes.
And it wasn't a nonprofit, it was just a no profit, which obviously, is a tongue in cheek, but there is that in the way that I felt I had a responsibility to build a culture of
like opening a nonprofit arm for the bookstore. Baldwin and Co. does that.
Maddie, I think we need you to mute, maybe.
100%.
There we go.
Um,
Okay.
uh, it was sort of creating this culture of philanthropy within the bookstore staff among, multiple stores and people who've done things a certain way for a really long time. There's also that creating that culture of philanthropy among people who've always supported books and books, for 44 years, or I mean, until 2 years ago when operations really started in a real way. People were used to my support is I show up, I go to events, I buy books, I come to the restaurant, right? Because the restaurant is a big part of the flagship store. Um, People had reached out to Mitchell during the pandemic and said, "What can I do to help you keep your doors open?" And he didn't have a vehicle for people who felt that way about books and books as an institution. And to be able to say to them, I would love for you to support me, but I can't give you like a tax write-off, to then be able to offer that so that people feel like it is truly charitable. I'm not helping a for-profit entity, whether or not there is actually any profit. I'm not helping a for-profit entity stay open and just saying goodbye to those dollars. I'm also receiving some benefit. For people who are operating at larger levels of giving, that is important. Is it important to offer that when you're talking about $10 over a register receipt? No. But it is when you're talking 10,000, 50,000, $100,000.
It definitely creates a cleaner ask, and I know we've explored on this podcast the multiple ways that people go about incorporating nonprofits into their work, whether they sit under a nonprofit like Hub City Books or um, More Than Words. They sit under a nonprofit that's established for a different reason, or whether they have a walk alongside foundation or nonprofit like this one and like King's English and like Baldwin and Company and others, or whether they're like Plenty and they're established fully as a nonprofit. But I know as a full nonprofit, one of the things I struggle with is making a clean ask, because it's hard for them to see where they're supporting the work of the bookshop and where they're supporting things like this, like taking books into book deserts or into homes where in poverty situations or people really need them. It's it's an exciting model. It's an exciting thing for the piece of work that you're expanding, and it sounds like it just has um, everywhere to go. That's up and bigger and better, and it's constantly growing. What do you see over the next year? What does the future look like for you in this work? You mentioned at the beginning that Mitch had a vision. I imagine you've developed one too. So, what's your new vision as we come into some of our final minutes?
Well, we definitely are hoping to grow our author visits. It's, as I said, our most robust program, but there's still so much more that we could be doing there. Um, and there were personnel shifts at the district level. There's a huge budget shortfall in the Miami-Dade County Public Schools. Um, it is, it's not going to be an easy road to grow even beyond what we've managed to do, but we're very committed to that. Um, so that's a major goal of mine. We're also going to start working in a bigger capacity with the Chapman Partnership, which operates two shelters, one in Homestead, the city south of Miami that I described, and one in downtown Miami. And families can stay there for up to 6 months. And we have that as a window to reach kids and also to reach parents. What we learned when we did two events with them, I guess those were both in 2025, that they'd never done programming that was for the entire family. Like not just book related or author related, just at all. They'd done stuff programming for kids and programming for grown-ups, but never together. And that and another program that we created with an organization called the Children's Trust and a literacy organization called Uplift Literacy, which was for kids 0 to 5 and their parents. Seeing this opportunity to create multi-generational book culture and reading habits is something that I really like keyed into as something that I don't see a lot of. I see a lot of literacy stuff where it's direct to kids, and I certainly see parenting courses and coaching, but I don't see like a lot of those things being connected. And in those spaces, we're able to do that. So we're able to bring in authors who can really speak to the parents and really speak to the kids and model the act of reading together as something that's joyful and fulfilling and has value. And especially when we're working with, while we may be literary, we are not a literacy organization, but if we work with one and they know how to kind of feed those tools to parents and directional things like doing this, 5 minutes a day could lead to X, Y, and Z improvements. I think we're kind of on that road toward instilling that into families where they may not have that as a habit. And, coming from a family where reading was so primary and knowing what it did for me, I just feel very compelled to bring that into other people's lives.
It's important. I mean, less than 2% of families are reading together, and about 30% of adults cannot read a children's book to a child. So, but if they're going to develop those skills, it's in the name and of their love for their child. And so that multi-generational work that you're talking about, it's so important. Steve, were you about to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say that, and we're just about out of time. It's been fantastic. Sarah, what's fascinating about your model is that it's definitely bootstraps. It's definitely chicken and egg. So they brought you in at, 5 hours or something, which is, by the way, the specialty of Lisa with her store, is having 20 people work 5 hours each. But anyway, it's a little more than that, I know. But anyway, it's fascinating you did it, and then you're increasing your time, your half time. But it fascinates me in terms of lessons for other smaller bookstores, single bookstores, because you can begin a lot of things small and then that if that thing can help you grow the thing you're working on, which is what you're doing, it's like planting a
Mm-hmm.
seed, and you're blossoming into a full-time, amazing kind of outreach person and nonprofit head, and it's something that every bookstore should, pay attention to. It's really fascinating. And
Well,
I did
thank
post, I'm
you.
sorry, I did a post, by the way, a link to both Mitchell's session. It was on the bottom of our email, Mitchell's session and the two Kepler sessions about this as well.
I'd love to just offer a couple of very quick ideas, tactical ideas. One is something that, we talked about earlier in a previous call, which is the idea of a fiscal sponsor. It's much easier to start a nonprofit and kind of get it up and running with a fiscal sponsor than to go through starting your own 501c3. You can still start your own, and a 501c3 is a nonprofit sort of in the eyes of the IRS. We'll shorthand it that way. That involves putting together a board, having your own financial and legal apparatus. It's much more formal. It takes more work. It's more expensive. You can always do that down the line. But for now, there are a lot of community organizations, foundations, nonprofits that actually act as umbrellas for other nonprofits. And that's actually our model that we're using currently and from the beginning has been to be a nonprofit organization under the umbrella of the Coral Gables Community Foundation. And every city, I mean, really of any size, and probably some towns as well, have these kinds of organizations where you can even be an artist with a project that you just want to do in the community, but you don't need to make any money off of it. you can go to them and say, I want to do this. They'll vet it. And then they provide you with services like legal, board, accounting, you don't have to get your own controller, et cetera. And the oversight, that's needed in exchange for a small percentage of the donations that you bring in. And for us, it's a really great deal because we absolutely would spend more of what we bring in on running and maintaining a full 501c3 of our own. So I highly recommend that. The other thing I wanted to mention is volunteers. There are often retired professionals, especially in communities, who are looking for something meaty to do, and volunteering their time on just an hourly basis in direct service is amazing, of course. But some of them have capacity to do something different, which is more strategic roles, which is more leadership kinds of roles. And I wouldn't be surprised if in all of the communities that are able to support an independent bookstore, there are going to be those kinds of folks who could help you stand up, especially in a fiscal sponsorship structure where they're not tasked with as many or maybe as weighty kinds of responsibilities, would be able to find other volunteers, interface with schools, find a space for you to do a free book fair, find event space if you don't have room in your store to do author events. And so to sort of lean on people that don't need to be paid to be able to help you with that work.
Good Lord. This has been incredible. Thank you, Sarah.
I'm also happy, if anybody wants to email me, and ask questions, I'm very happy to be of service.
When did you put your address in the, or I can even do
sure.
that.
I think we'll have it in our follow-up. And
okay.
This is amazing, Sarah. Thank you so much for this meaty conversation and
pleasure.
For the work that you're investing yourself in. It's really, you're underscoring all the things that we share, concern, our common sense of the problem, and just been very, very helpful. And there's the in the chat,
Yeah, I'm
Steve
worried
just
about putting
your,
in the transcript where it gets on YouTube and then
yeah. So we got Sarah B at booksandbooks.com. So thank you, Sarah, so much for being here. Thank you for everybody for joining in, and we're going to keep this forever and ever and keep referencing it. So
yeah, thanks so much. There's
oh boy.
3 more sessions out of it. Sarah, you've actually given us ideas for 3 more sessions.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right. Bye, everybody.